I spent 3 years being blamed for my stepsister's actions until someone finally caught her on camera. The first time Olivia framed me, I was 15 and stupid enough to think my stepfather would believe the truth. Someone had shattered the glass display case in our living room that held his grandmother's antique porcelain collection, pieces worth thousands of dollars that he'd inherited after her death. I'd been upstairs doing homework when I heard the crash, followed immediately by Olivia's scream. By the time I ran downstairs, she was standing in the doorway with wide eyes and trembling hands, pointing at the destroyed case, while my stepfather Gerald surveyed the damage with a face carved from stone. Olivia said she'd seen me throw my basketball at the case in a fit of rage after he'd grounded me the previous week. The basketball was indeed lying among the shattered glass and broken porcelain, but I hadn't touched it in days. Gerald didn't ask for my side of the story. He looked at the basketball, looked at Olivia's tearful face, and told me I'd be paying for the damages through a year of unpaid labor around the house. My mother stood behind him wringing her hands, her expression trapped between wanting to defend me and wanting to keep peace with her new husband of only 8 months. When I tried to explain that I'd been upstairs the entire time, Gerald cut me off and said physical evidence didn't lie. Olivia had positioned herself perfectly in his line of sight, her face a mask of sympathetic concern that disappeared the instant he turned away. She smiled at me then, a quick flash of satisfaction that told me everything I needed to know about my new stepsister. The labor started that weekend. Gerald made a list of tasks that would take me months to complete, repainting the entire exterior of our 3-story house, reorganizing the garage from floor to ceiling, rebuilding the garden retaining wall that had crumbled over the previous winter. Each task was assigned a dollar value that Gerald calculated against the cost of replacing his grandmother's collection. My mother tried to intervene once, suggesting the punishment was too severe for an accident, but Gerald reminded her that destruction of property through reckless anger wasn't an accident. I worked every weekend and most afternoons after school, while Olivia watched from her bedroom window, occasionally waving as I hauled paint cans or stacked bricks in the summer heat. Olivia was 17, 2 years older than me, and had lived with Gerald since her mother's death 5 years earlier. She was beautiful in the way that made adults trust her instantly, with clear skin and careful makeup and clothes that always looked freshly pressed. Teachers loved her because she volunteered for every school event and maintained perfect grades. Gerald's friends praised him for raising such a well-adjusted daughter despite her tragic loss. My mother tried desperately to bond with Olivia, buying her expensive gifts and planning mother-daughter activities that Olivia accepted with gracious smiles before finding excuses to cancel. No one saw what I saw, the calculated cruelty behind her performance of perfection. The second incident happened 3 months after the porcelain disaster. Someone had been stealing small amounts of cash from Gerald's wallet over several weeks, never more than $20 at a time. Gerald mentioned it casually at dinner one evening, saying he must be losing track of his spending. The next morning, he found 4 $20 bills tucked inside my chemistry textbook when he was looking for something in my backpack. Olivia had been the one to suggest he check my school materials, claiming she'd seen me acting suspicious around his wallet the previous week. Gerald's face went red as he held up the cash, demanding to know what kind of person stole from the man providing them a home and food and education. I told him I'd never touched his wallet, that someone must have planted the money in my textbook. Gerald actually laughed at that, a harsh sound that made my mother flinch. He said I was apparently not just a thief, but a coward who wouldn't take responsibility for my actions. The punishment this time was more severe. I was banned from all extracurricular activities for the remainder of the school year, which meant quitting the debate team I'd worked 2 years to join. Gerald also implemented a rule that I had to account for my whereabouts every hour when not in school, essentially putting me under house arrest. My mother tried to argue that the punishment was disproportionate, but Gerald said he wouldn't tolerate criminal behavior in his household, and she needed to support his parenting decisions or admit she'd raised a delinquent. Olivia's campaign against me became more sophisticated after that. She'd leave evidence of wrongdoing that pointed exclusively to me while maintaining her perfect daughter facade. Someone downloaded pirated movies using my computer, generating a threatening letter from our internet provider about copyright violations. Someone dented Gerald's car in the garage, and paint transfer analysis showed it matched my bicycle exactly. Someone stole jewelry from our neighbor's house during a party, and the necklace turned up in my dresser drawer after an anonymous tip. Each incident resulted in new punishments, new restrictions, new ways Gerald found to make my life smaller and more controlled. My mother started looking at me differently around the 6-month mark. She'd initially defended me out of maternal instinct, insisting I was a good kid who'd never been in trouble before her remarriage. But the evidence kept accumulating, and Gerald was relentless in pointing out that loving mothers sometimes raised troubled children who needed firm discipline. I caught my mother staring at me sometimes with this expression of confused disappointment, like she was trying to reconcile the son she'd known for 15 years with the delinquent Gerald described. Olivia was always there during these moments, offering to help me with whatever I was allegedly struggling with, suggesting therapy or counseling in a voice dripping with false concern. The school incident started during my sophomore year. Someone spray-painted profanity on the gym wall using paint that matched a can in our garage, paint that had mysteriously appeared in my possession. Someone slashed the tires on the principal's car, and the knife used was found in my locker after an anonymous note directed administrators to search it. Someone hacked into the school's grading system and changed several students' grades, and the IP address traced back to my laptop. Each incident resulted in suspensions, parent conferences where Gerald sat stone-faced while administrators described my escalating behavioral problems, and court-ordered community service for the property destruction. My grades collapsed under the weight of constant punishment and restriction. I couldn't join study groups because I wasn't allowed social activities. I couldn't access online resources because Gerald had restricted my internet use after the pirating incident. I couldn't focus on homework because I spent every free moment either completing punishment labor or worrying about what Olivia would do next. My GPA dropped from a 3.8 to a 2.3 in 8 months, which Gerald cited as proof that I was spiraling out of control. College was slipping away from me, along with any hope of escape, and I could feel my future contracting into something small and desperate. I tried telling my mother the truth during a rare moment when Gerald was traveling for work. I explained that Olivia was framing me systematically, that she was the one committing these acts and planting evidence to implicate me. My mother listened with her arms crossed, her face cycling through emotions I couldn't read. When I finished, she asked why Olivia would do such terrible things to someone who'd never hurt her. I said I didn't know. Maybe she resented the remarriage or felt threatened by my presence. My mother shook her head slowly and said, I needed to stop blaming others for my problems, that taking responsibility was the first step toward getting better. She suggested I was acting out because of the divorce and her remarriage, which was understandable but unacceptable. The worst part was watching Olivia's relationship with my mother develop while mine deteriorated. Olivia had been cool and distant initially, but as my reputation crumbled, she warmed up considerably. She started asking my mother for advice about colleges and boys and future plans, conversations they'd have in the living room while I was confined to my bedroom under another punishment. My mother bloomed under Olivia's attention, finally getting the daughter bonding she'd craved. I'd hear them laughing together while I organized the garage for the 3rd time or repainted the fence I'd already painted twice. Olivia was stealing my mother along with my reputation, replacing me in our family structure one manufactured incident at a time. Gerald's friend Richard owned a security company and suggested installing cameras around our property after the neighbor's jewelry theft. Gerald agreed immediately, saying he wanted to catch me in the act of whatever I'd surely do next. The cameras went up on a Saturday morning, one covering the driveway, one covering the backyard, one covering the garage entrance. Richard explained that the cameras had motion sensors and would record whenever someone entered their range, with footage uploaded to a secure cloud server. Gerald told me directly that these cameras would prove once and for all that I was the problem child he knew me to be. Olivia stood behind him during this announcement, her expression carefully neutral, but I saw something flicker in her eyes that might have been concern. 2 weeks after the cameras were installed, someone keyed Gerald's car in the driveway. Deep gouges spelling out profanity ran along the passenger side, damage that would cost thousands to repair. Gerald discovered it Monday morning before work and immediately pulled up the camera footage on his phone. I was eating breakfast at the kitchen table when he stormed in, his face purple with rage. He shoved his phone screen in my face, showing footage of someone in a dark hoodie approaching his car around 2 a.m. and methodically keying the doors. The person's face wasn't visible in the footage, but the hoodie was unmistakably mine, the navy blue one with the white drawstrings that I wore constantly. Gerald said he was calling the police and having me arrested for destruction of property, that he was done trying to rehabilitate a criminal. I stared at the footage, feeling something break inside my chest. The person in the video moved like me, wore my clothes, even seemed to have my slight slouch. But I'd been asleep at 2 a.m., deep in the dreamless sleep of exhaustion after completing another punishment task. I tried to explain this, but Gerald was already dialing his phone. My mother appeared in the doorway looking devastated, tears streaming down her face as she asked how I could do something so vicious. Olivia came downstairs rubbing her eyes like she'd just woken up, saw the chaos, and immediately wrapped her arms around my mother in a comforting embrace. I watched my stepsister console my mother over my supposed actions, while knowing with absolute certainty that Olivia had worn my hoodie to frame me one more time. The police arrived within 30 minutes. Officer Kaplan was a middle-aged woman with tired eyes who'd apparently responded to several calls about me over the past year. She watched the security footage on Gerald's phone, took statements from everyone in the household, and then asked to speak with me privately. We sat in the living room where the porcelain case had once stood while she reviewed her notes. Officer Kaplan asked if I'd keyed the car, and I said no. She asked where I'd been at 2 a.m., and I said sleeping in my bedroom. She asked if anyone could confirm that, and I realized no one could, because my bedroom door didn't have exterior locks, and my mother slept on the opposite end of the house with Gerald. Officer Kaplan explained that the security footage was pretty damning evidence, but she wanted to give me a chance to tell my side before writing her report. Something about her tone made me think she might actually listen, so I told her everything, all of it, From the porcelain case, to the planted money, to the spray paint, to this morning's car keying. I explained that my stepsister had been systematically framing me for 3 years, destroying my reputation and future while maintaining her perfect daughter performance. Officer Kaplan took notes without interrupting, her expression neutral until I finished. Then she asked the question that always killed me. Why would your stepsister do that? I said I didn't know for certain, but I thought she resented sharing her father's attention and resources with new family members. Officer Kaplan closed her notebook and looked at me for a long moment. She said she'd seen cases of sibling rivalry before, but what I was describing would require exceptional planning and sociopathic behavior from a straight-A honor student with no history of problems. She asked if I had any proof of Olivia's involvement in any of the incidents. I didn't have proof because that was the entire point of Olivia's strategy. She created evidence against me while leaving none against herself. Officer Kaplan said she understood this was a difficult family situation, but the evidence clearly showed me committing crimes. She was going to recommend charges for the car vandalism, and I should consider getting a lawyer. My mother overheard this from the hallway and started sobbing loudly enough that Gerald had to take her outside. The charges were filed the next day: criminal mischief and destruction of property. Gerald hired a lawyer to ensure prosecution, telling anyone who'd listen that he refused to let me get away with this behavior any longer. My court-appointed lawyer was a harried man named Donald Reeves, who looked at my case file with obvious resignation. He explained that the security footage was strong evidence of guilt, that fighting the charges would likely result in harsher sentencing, and I should consider accepting a plea deal. The deal offered 6 months in juvenile detention, 2 years of probation, and restitution for all the damage I'd allegedly caused over the past 3 years. Donald said it was actually a generous offer considering my record of incidents, and I should take it before the prosecutor changed her mind. I refused the plea deal. Donald looked at me like I was insane when I said I wouldn't plead guilty to something I didn't do, no matter how good the deal was. He tried to explain that juvenile detention was much better than adult prison, which is where I'd end up if I fought the charges and lost. My mother begged me to take the deal, saying 6 months wasn't forever, and I'd be home before senior year started. Gerald said my stubbornness proved I hadn't learned anything from my punishments, that I'd rather destroy my entire life than admit wrongdoing. Olivia said quietly that she'd support whatever decision I made, that she just wanted our family to heal. I looked at her perfect, concerned expression and felt rage so pure it scared me. The trial was scheduled for 3 months out. During that time, I was released to Gerald's custody with a court-mandated curfew and electronic monitoring. I wore an ankle bracelet that tracked my location 24/7, ensuring I couldn't leave the house except for school and court appearances. Gerald treated me like a prisoner in my own home, implementing new rules that restricted when I could eat, shower, or use the bathroom. My mother stopped trying to defend me after I refused the plea deal, telling me I'd made my choice and would have to live with the consequences. Olivia continued her perfect daughter routine, bringing my mother tea when she was upset and offering to tutor me if I wanted to keep up with schoolwork despite my legal troubles. Donald Reeves did minimal preparation for trial. He filed standard motions, interviewed me once more to confirm my version of events, and admitted candidly that our defense strategy was basically hoping the jury felt sympathetic toward a troubled teen from a blended family. He didn't investigate Olivia's background, didn't request additional security footage that might show her taking my hoodie, didn't hire experts to analyze the video for signs of tampering. When I suggested these things, Donald explained that defense investigations cost money I didn't have, and most of my ideas were long shots that wouldn't change the fundamental evidence problem. The security footage showed someone who looked like me committing a crime while wearing my clothes, and no amount of speculation about my stepsister would make that footage disappear. 2 weeks before trial, something unexpected happened. Richard, Gerald's security company friend, came by the house to check on the camera system and mentioned to Gerald that his company had just upgraded their cloud storage to include AI-powered analysis. The new system could automatically tag people in footage, track patterns of movement, and even detect anomalies in recorded video. Richard offered to run our footage through the new system as a demonstration of its capabilities, saying it might catch details human eyes missed. Gerald agreed immediately, excited about the technology and probably hoping it would provide even more evidence of my guilt. Richard uploaded all our footage from the past month into his company's new analysis system and said results would be ready in a few days. I was washing dishes after dinner when Richard came back with his laptop 4 days later. Gerald invited him into the study, but I could hear their conversation from the kitchen, where I was stationed. Richard's voice sounded confused as he explained that the AI system had flagged some anomalies in our footage that he wanted to discuss. Gerald asked what kind of anomalies, and Richard said the system had detected 2 different people being tagged as the same individual in various clips. The AI's facial recognition was sophisticated enough to identify subtle differences in gait, posture, and movement patterns, even when faces weren't clearly visible. According to the analysis, 2 different people had worn the same navy hoodie in footage from the past month, and the person who keyed the car wasn't the same person who appeared in most other footage wearing that hoodie. The study went silent. I stopped washing dishes and moved closer to the doorway, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. Gerald asked Richard to explain what he meant in clearer terms. Richard said his system had identified person A as appearing in footage 86 times over the past month, mostly doing yard work or taking out trash while wearing the navy hoodie. Person A had a distinctive gait with a slight limp, favoring the left leg, probably from an old injury. Person B appeared in only 3 footage clips, including the car keying incident, and moved completely differently, despite wearing identical clothing. The AI was confident these were 2 separate individuals based on biomechanical analysis. Richard said he'd assumed initially that someone had tampered with the footage, but the files showed no signs of editing or manipulation. Gerald's voice was tight when he asked if Richard was suggesting someone else had keyed his car while wearing my hoodie. Richard said he wasn't suggesting anything, just presenting what his system had found. The AI couldn't identify person B because their face was always obscured, but the movement analysis clearly showed this wasn't the same person who normally wore that hoodie. Gerald was quiet for several seconds before asking if Richard could send him a full report of the analysis. Richard said he'd already prepared one and handed over a printed document with highlighted sections and comparison screenshots. I heard papers rustling, then Gerald's chair scraping against the floor. When he emerged from the study, his face was ashen and his hands were shaking. Gerald called everyone to the living room. My mother came down from her bedroom where she'd been reading. Olivia emerged from her room with careful concern painted on her face. I stood in the doorway to the kitchen, still wearing dish gloves, afraid to hope for what might happen next. Gerald held Richard's report like it was a bomb about to explode. He looked at Olivia for a long moment before asking where she'd been at 2 a.m. on the morning his car was keyed. Olivia's expression didn't change as she said she'd been sleeping in her room like everyone else. Gerald asked if she'd ever borrowed my navy hoodie, and something flickered across her face that was gone too quickly to name. She said no, she'd never wear my clothes. We had completely different styles. Richard cleared his throat and explained that his system had also analyzed footage from earlier dates when other incidents occurred. The spray paint incident 3 months ago had also shown someone moving differently than the person who normally wore my hoodie and used the garage. The slashed tire incident had similar anomalies. Richard said he hadn't examined every incident from the past 3 years, but the pattern was consistent. 2 different people appeared in footage involving property damage, even though both wore identical clothing and took care to hide their faces. Gerald asked directly if Richard was accusing Olivia of framing me. Richard said he wasn't accusing anyone, just presenting objective analysis from his company's AI system. What anyone did with that information was up to them. Olivia stood up smoothly and said this was ridiculous. She asked if Gerald really believed she'd been secretly committing crimes and blaming me, and what possible reason would she have for doing something so elaborate and cruel. Her voice held just the right note of hurt bewilderment, and I watched my mother's face soften in response. Olivia said she understood that I was desperate to avoid consequences, but inventing conspiracy theories about her wasn't going to help my case. She looked at me with what appeared to be genuine sadness and said she'd tried so hard to be a good sister to me despite everything, and this accusation was heartbreaking. My mother reached out to comfort her, but Gerald held up his hand. Gerald told Olivia to go to her room while he figured this out. Olivia's mask slipped for just a fraction of a second, her eyes going cold before she remembered to look wounded. She said she didn't understand why she was being punished when she hadn't done anything wrong. Gerald's voice was harder than I'd ever heard it when he repeated that she should go to her room immediately. Olivia looked to my mother for support, but my mother was staring at the report in Gerald's hands with a confused expression. Olivia left the room with her head high, but I saw her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The moment she disappeared up the stairs, Gerald turned to Richard and asked what it would take to analyze all the footage from the past 3 years. Richard explained that his company could run a comprehensive analysis, but it would take time and wouldn't be cheap since it wasn't a demonstration project anymore. Gerald said money wasn't an issue. He needed to know the truth about what had been happening in his household. Richard nodded and said he'd prepare a proper contract for full forensic analysis of all security footage, plus any additional investigation Gerald wanted. My mother asked quietly if Gerald really thought Olivia could have done all those terrible things. Gerald didn't answer directly, just said that Richard's system didn't lie and the gait analysis was based on objective biomechanical data. He looked at me standing in the kitchen doorway and said, "We'd know the truth soon enough." The full analysis took 2 weeks and cost Gerald over $8,000. Richard's company brought in forensic specialists who examined every second of footage from our security system, using advanced AI to identify individuals based on movement patterns, body measurements, and behavioral tics. They also analyzed footage from before the cameras were installed by requesting security recordings from neighbors and local businesses that might have captured activity around our property. The resulting report was 127 pages long and came with video compilations highlighting key findings. Richard delivered it to Gerald on a Saturday morning, and I watched from my bedroom window as Gerald sat in his car reading the report for over an hour before coming inside. The report was definitive. The AI had identified 2 distinct individuals in footage involving property damage and theft over the past 3 years. Person A, identified as me through facial recognition and consistent movement patterns, appeared in normal daily activities and routine tasks. Person B, whose face was never visible in the footage, appeared exclusively in clips related to criminal activity and moved in ways that matched Olivia's documented gait patterns from school surveillance footage the company had obtained. The report included biomechanical analysis showing Person B was shorter than Person A by approximately 2 inches, matching the height difference between Olivia and me. Most damning, the report traced several incidents where Person B could be seen taking clothing from my room through a window view, then returning it hours later. Gerald called my mother and me into the study. His face looked 10 years older than it had 2 weeks ago, carved with lines of stress and something that might have been shame. He said the report proved Olivia had been committing crimes and systematically framing me for years. The evidence was overwhelming and impossible to dismiss. He'd already contacted Officer Kaplan to request the charges against me be dropped and new charges be filed against Olivia. My mother made a strangled sound and asked if he was certain, if there wasn't some other explanation. Gerald showed her the video compilations, pointing out the gait differences and the footage of someone entering my room. My mother watched in silence, tears streaming down her face, as 3 years of my accusations finally proved true. I felt nothing. I'd expected Vindication to feel triumphant or satisfying, but instead, I just felt hollow and exhausted. Gerald was apologizing, explaining that he'd had no reason to suspect Olivia, since she'd always been perfect, that he'd failed as a parent by not investigating more thoroughly. My mother was sobbing into her hands, asking how she'd gotten everything so wrong about both her children. I stood there listening to them process their guilt while thinking about the 3 years I'd lost, the reputation I'd never recover, the college prospects that had evaporated. The truth had come out, but it couldn't give me back what Olivia had stolen. Officer Kaplan arrived within 2 hours of Gerald's call. She looked grim as Gerald showed her the forensic report and video evidence. She asked where Olivia was, and Gerald said he'd confined her to her room after receiving the report, but hadn't confronted her yet with the evidence. Officer Kaplan said she'd need to interview Olivia formally and requested that the family not discuss the evidence with her until police had made their own assessment. Gerald agreed immediately, clearly desperate to cooperate, now that he understood the magnitude of his mistakes. Officer Kaplan asked to speak with me privately, and we ended up in the same living room where she'd taken my statement after the car keying incident. Officer Kaplan apologized directly for not believing me. She said she'd seen hundreds of troubled teens over her career and had developed biases about which ones were lying. The evidence in my case had seemed so clear-cut, and I'd fit a profile of an acting-out child from a blended family. She'd missed the truth because she'd been looking at the wrong suspect, and she took full responsibility for that failure. I appreciated her apology, but told her what I really wanted was for Olivia to face consequences for destroying my life. Officer Kaplan said that would happen, though she cautioned that Olivia was a minor and a first-time offender in the system's eyes, which would affect sentencing. The irony wasn't lost on either of us that I'd almost been convicted and sent to juvenile detention based on Olivia's carefully constructed frame job. The interview with Olivia lasted 3 hours. Officer Kaplan brought a detective and a child psychologist, and they questioned her in our dining room while I waited upstairs in my bedroom. I could hear Olivia's voice occasionally, rising in what sounded like righteous indignation or wounded innocence. At one point, my mother screamed something I couldn't make out, and Gerald's voice responded in harsh tones that made the house feel even more fragile. Eventually, Officer Kaplan came upstairs and told me Olivia had confessed to everything after being shown the forensic evidence. She'd admitted to years of framing me, stealing my clothes to commit crimes, and planting evidence to ensure I'd be blamed. She hadn't shown remorse exactly, but had explained her reasoning in ways that made the psychologist concerned about her mental health. Olivia was arrested that evening. I watched from my bedroom window as Officer Kaplan led her to the police car in handcuffs, Olivia's face finally stripped of its perfect daughter mask. She looked up at my window before getting in the car, and for a moment our eyes met. Her expression was pure hatred, no performance or pretense, just raw loathing for the stepbrother who'd survived her campaign of destruction. I stared back at her without expression, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing emotion. The car pulled away with my stepsister in the back seat, and I felt something release in my chest that I'd been holding tight for 3 years. It wasn't relief exactly, more like the absence of constant fear, the space where terror had lived finally going quiet. The next weeks were a blur of legal proceedings and family therapy sessions. Olivia was charged with multiple counts of filing false police reports, evidence tampering, property destruction, and identity fraud. The prosecutor built a case using Richard's forensic analysis, testimony from me and others, and Olivia's own confession. My charges were formally dropped, and my record expunged, though the prosecutor warned that repairing my reputation would take time since the public accusations had been well documented. Gerald hired lawyers for both me and Olivia, though he seemed to age years during each court appearance, where evidence of his daughter's systematic cruelty was presented in clinical detail. The family therapy sessions were brutal. Dr. Raina Patel specialized in blended family dynamics and didn't pull punches when addressing how badly the adults had failed. She told my mother directly that ignoring my consistent claims of innocence in favor of believing accumulated evidence showed a fundamental failure of maternal instinct. She told Gerald that his rigid certainty about my guilt and refusal to investigate alternative explanations had enabled years of abuse by his daughter. She said they'd both chosen the comfortable narrative over the difficult questions, prioritizing family harmony over truth, until the harmony was revealed as fiction. My mother cried through most sessions while Gerald sat in stony silence, occasionally trying to explain his reasoning before Dr. Patel cut him off. Olivia's trial resulted in a plea deal. 2 years in a juvenile facility, followed by intensive psychiatric treatment and probation until age 21. The judge cited her age and lack of prior official record, despite the years of criminal activity that had gone undetected. During her sentencing hearing, Olivia was given a chance to address the court. She stood in her orange jumpsuit and said she was sorry for the pain she'd caused everyone, that she'd been struggling with mental health issues and had taken them out on the wrong people. She cried convincingly, and several people in the courtroom looked sympathetic. She never once looked at me during her statement, never acknowledged that she'd deliberately tried to destroy my life for 3 years with calculated precision. The apology was as fake as everything else about her. My mother filed for divorce from Gerald 3 months after Olivia's sentencing. She said she couldn't reconcile how Gerald had treated me based on his daughter's lies, how quickly he'd believed the worst about me without ever investigating. Gerald didn't fight the divorce, seeming relieved to have an excuse to dissolve a marriage that had been built on his daughter's deception. The property settlement was complicated, but my mother got enough to buy a small house across town where we moved as soon as the divorce finalized. She'd also retained a lawyer who threatened legal action against Gerald for emotional distress and punitive damages related to my treatment, which Gerald settled out of court for an amount that would cover my college expenses. My reputation at school was harder to repair than my legal record. Even after the truth came out and local news covered Olivia's conviction, people still looked at me strangely. Teachers who'd written me off as a troubled teen struggled to adjust their perception. Students who'd avoided me because of my criminal reputation didn't suddenly want to be friends. The guidance counselor suggested I might want to transfer schools for a fresh start, but I refused on principle. I'd lost 3 years to Olivia's lies, and I wouldn't let her take anything more from me. I finished junior year with my head down, focused on rebuilding my GPA and avoiding social situations that reminded me how completely I'd been isolated. Senior year brought unexpected redemption. My story had spread beyond our town through news coverage, and several advocacy organizations focused on wrongful accusations reached out. I did interviews about my experience, talking honestly about how easily the justice system believed manufactured evidence over consistent denials. College admissions counselors suggested I write about my experience in application essays, framing it as overcoming adversity rather than hiding criminal charges that had been dismissed. Universities that valued diversity of experience and resilience through hardship were apparently interested in students who'd survived systematic framing by family members. The essays were painful to write, forcing me to relive every incident and punishment, but they worked. I was accepted to 6 universities with full scholarships to 4 of them. The acceptance letters arrived during spring semester of senior year, each one feeling like proof that Olivia hadn't succeeded in destroying my future. I chose a school 3 states away, far enough that I'd never accidentally run into anyone who knew my history, but close enough that my mother could visit if she wanted. Gerald sent a letter through his lawyer apologizing again and offering to contribute to my education expenses beyond what my mother's settlement covered. I declined through my own lawyer, wanting no connection to the man who'd believed his daughter's lies over my truth for 3 years straight. Some bridges once burned should stay burned. My mother struggled with guilt that manifested in overcompensation. She bought me excessive going away to college gifts, called me daily once I moved into my dorm, and apologized repeatedly for failing to protect me when I needed her. I told her I forgave her, which was partially true, but something between us had broken that might never fully repair. She'd chosen comfort over truth when it mattered most, and I couldn't forget that no matter how much I wanted to. We maintained our relationship in a careful, distant way, weekly phone calls and holiday visits that never quite felt natural. She remained my mother, but the automatic trust of childhood was gone, replaced by cautious affection and guarded conversations. Olivia was released from the juvenile facility after 18 months for good behavior. She entered court-mandated psychiatric treatment and was prohibited from contacting me or my mother as part of her probation. Gerald moved to a different state shortly after her release, taking Olivia with him for a fresh start, where no one knew their history. My mother heard through mutual acquaintances that Olivia was working retail and living with Gerald while attending community college. The reports said she was doing well, had gotten therapy, and was supposedly a changed person. I didn't care whether she'd changed or not, just felt grateful that she was living her life somewhere far from mine. Some people don't deserve second chances in your life, even if the system gives them second chances in general. College was liberating in ways I couldn't have imagined. No one knew my history unless I chose to share it. I made friends based on actual personality rather than manufactured reputation. Professors evaluated my work without preconceptions about my character. I joined the debate team I'd been forced to quit junior year of high school and discovered I was good at arguing positions and dismantling flawed logic. My coach said I had an unusual ability to identify weak points in arguments, probably not knowing that skill had been developed through years of having my own arguments dismissed despite being objectively correct. I majored in criminal justice with a focus on wrongful convictions, wanting to understand the system that had nearly destroyed me. My senior thesis examined how confirmation bias in law enforcement led to wrongful accusations in blended family situations. I interviewed experts in forensic psychology, analyzed case studies of similar family frauds, and included my own experience as a primary source. The thesis won departmental honors and was published in a legal psychology journal, which helped my applications to law school. Several professors encouraged me to pursue advocacy work for wrongful conviction cases, saying my personal experience gave me unique insight into how easily innocent people could be railroaded by circumstantial evidence and systemic bias. I was accepted to 3 law schools and chose the one with the Best Innocence Project program. Law school was grueling but purposeful. Every case I studied about wrongful convictions reminded me of my own near miss with the justice system. Every discussion about evidence reliability made me think about security footage that almost sent me to juvenile detention. My classmates sometimes found my perspective intense, but professors valued having someone who'd lived through false accusations rather than just studied them academically. I volunteered with the Innocence Project from my first semester, working on cases where people had been convicted on circumstantial evidence and questionable witness testimony. Each exoneration felt personal, like I was saving the person I could have become if Richard's AI hadn't caught the gate differences in our security footage. I graduated law school at 25 and immediately joined a nonprofit legal organization specializing in wrongful conviction cases. The work was emotionally exhausting but deeply satisfying, helping people who'd lost years or decades to false accusations and flawed investigations. My colleagues were brilliant and passionate, united by anger at a justice system that prioritized conviction rates over actual justice. We celebrated every exoneration like a personal victory and mourned every case where we couldn't find enough evidence to overturn a conviction. I thought about Olivia sometimes during this work, wondering if she understood how close she'd come to succeeding in her years-long campaign to destroy me. Probably not. Sociopaths rarely grasped the full impact of their actions on others. My mother remarried when I was 27, this time to a man named Thomas, who seemed genuinely kind and had no children from previous relationships. I attended the small wedding and gave a toast, wishing them happiness, while carefully not mentioning how her previous marriage had nearly destroyed her son. My relationship with my mother had slowly improved over the years, built on weekly phone calls and occasional visits, where we avoided discussing anything deeper than surface topics. She never brought up Gerald or Olivia unless I did first, which was almost never. Some wounds healed better when left alone rather than constantly examined. I met my future wife during a wrongful conviction conference when I was 29. She was a forensic psychologist who specialized in false confession cases, and we bonded over shared frustration with how easily the system railroaded vulnerable people. I told her my story on our 3rd date, needing her to understand why I was so committed to this work. She listened without judgment and said my experience made me better at the job, not damaged or broken. We were married 2 years later in a small ceremony attended by friends and colleagues who shared our passion for justice reform. My mother cried during the reception, and I knew she was thinking about all the normal life moments she'd almost lost by believing Olivia's lies. I hugged her and told her I was happy, which was true enough to smooth over the complicated history between us. Gerald died of a heart attack when I was 33. Olivia sent a letter to my mother's address requesting that I attend the funeral since I was technically family. I declined through a lawyer maintaining the no-contact boundary I'd established when she was first arrested. My mother went to the funeral and reported back that Olivia had seemed genuinely sad, had established a stable life, and had asked about me multiple times. My mother suggested I might consider meeting with Olivia for closure now that we were adults. I said some doors were better left closed, that closure was overrated when the person seeking it had systematically tried to destroy your adolescence. My mother looked disappointed, but didn't push further. The advocacy work continued through my 30s. I argued cases before appellate courts, published articles about false accusation dynamics, and lectured at law schools about the psychology of wrongful convictions. My reputation grew in criminal justice reform circles, and I was invited to testify before legislative committees about improving investigative standards and evidence evaluation. During one testimony, a senator asked what personal experience drove my passion for this work. I told my story publicly for the first time outside academic settings, explaining how my stepsister had framed me for years while adults believed manufactured evidence over consistent denial. The testimony went viral on social media, sparking discussions about family dynamics, confirmation bias, and the frightening ease with which innocent people could be convicted. That viral moment brought unexpected consequences. I received hundreds of messages from people who'd experienced similar family-based false accusations, teenagers who'd been framed by siblings or step-family members, adults still carrying trauma from childhood scapegoating. Their stories were heartbreaking and familiar, variations on the same theme of being systematically blamed while authority figures believed the lies. I started a support network for false accusation survivors, connecting people with legal resources and therapeutic support. The network grew rapidly, eventually becoming a registered nonprofit with volunteer lawyers and counselors helping families navigate these complex situations. Every person we helped felt like retroactive justice for the 15-year-old kid I'd been. Olivia reached out directly when I was 38, finding my work email through the nonprofit's public website. Her message was carefully written, acknowledging what she'd done and expressing remorse that sounded more genuine than her court apology. She said therapy had helped her understand the pathology behind her actions, that she'd been a deeply troubled teenager who'd taken her pain out on an innocent person. She wanted to apologize properly and make amends if I was willing to meet. I read the email 3 times before deleting it without responding. Some apologies came too late to matter, and I didn't owe her forgiveness just because she'd finally developed the capacity for remorse. My healing hadn't required her participation, and I wasn't interested in becoming part of her healing process. My daughter was born when I was 40, a healthy baby girl with my wife's eyes and my stubborn chin. Holding her in the hospital, I thought about all the ways parents could fail their children by believing lies over truth, by choosing comfortable narratives over difficult questions. I promised my daughter silently that I'd always listen when she told me something, that I'd investigate before judging, that I'd never sacrifice her well-being for family harmony or social appearances. My wife smiled at me holding our daughter and said she already knew I'd be an amazing father because I understood what children needed most, to be believed and protected rather than doubted and punished. We named our daughter Iris, meaning rainbow, symbolizing hope that appears after storms. 25 years after Olivia's arrest, I was invited to speak at Wellington University's Criminal Justice Symposium. The irony of returning to my hometown as an expert rather than a convicted delinquent wasn't lost on me. I stood at the podium looking out at students and faculty, many too young to remember the local scandal about the step-sibling framing case. I told my story completely this time, from the first broken porcelain case through the years of punishment and false accusations to the final vindication through AI-analyzed security footage. I explained how technological advancement had saved me where human judgment had failed, and how that experience shaped my career helping others whom the system had wronged. The audience gave me a standing ovation, but what mattered more were the students who approached me afterward to share their own stories of being wrongly accused by family members. The cycle continued, but now there were more people fighting to break it. After my speech, an elderly woman introduced herself as Gladys, Gerald's late mother's sister. She said she'd attended because she wanted to apologize on behalf of her family for what Gerald's daughter had done to me. She'd heard the stories at the time, but had believed Gerald's version that I was a troubled teen, never questioning why her great-nephew would suddenly become delinquent after his mother's remarriage. She said she was sorry for not investigating when something didn't add up, and she hoped I'd found peace despite the injustice. I thanked her for the apology and told her I was doing well, that I'd built a good life from the wreckage Olivia had created. Gladys hugged me before leaving, and I realized I'd finally achieved something resembling closure, without needing anything from the people who'd actually wronged me. The nonprofit I'd founded expanded to operate in 15 states by my 50th birthday, helping hundreds of wrongful conviction cases and false accusation survivors annually. We'd successfully exonerated 43 people who'd been convicted based on circumstances similar to mine, family member frame jobs, confirmation bias, and circumstantial evidence that looked damning until properly investigated. Each case reminded me how easily I could have been number 44 if Richard's security system hadn't been upgraded exactly when it was needed. Luck and technology had saved me, but I'd spent decades ensuring others didn't need to rely on luck. The work was my legacy, transforming personal trauma into systematic change that protected vulnerable people from the kind of injustice I'd survived. I never spoke to Olivia again after that deleted email when I was 38. She lived her life in a different state, with a different name, from what I occasionally heard through distant family connections. I didn't seek updates and didn't care about her continuing redemption arc or rehabilitation success stories. She'd tried to destroy my adolescence and nearly succeeded, and my indifference to her adult life felt like the most honest response I could offer. She existed somewhere in the world, and I existed somewhere else, and that separation was exactly what I'd fought for during those 3 years of being blamed for her crimes. Sometimes the best revenge was living well, while the person who tried to destroy you became irrelevant to your happiness. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.